Hi folks, thanks for joining us. Let's segue into estate planning and the other side of this coin, which is, making sure that everybody is taken care of. It seems amorphous. The topic is huge. So where do you start there?
Well, this is going to be the biggest transfer of wealth in all of history, in the sense of the generation that's passing away now is the wealthiest generation that we've had in American history. And they're living longer, accumulating more money, and there are several issues that we have to consider. One is you need estate planning documents to direct what's going to happen with your assets.
In other words, you've got to write it down.
You do have to write it down.
If you're specific.
Yeah, if you're a young family and have 2 kids and something, God forbid, happens to you, it's part of estate planning to decide who is going to raise those 2 kids. Mm-hmm. I had a client where both people died, unfortunately, in the same car accident with reasonably young children. And it unfortunately went down to the will and different documents to raise those children. And that's sort of on that end. On the other end, if you've accumulated a lot of assets, there is estate tax. In Massachusetts, there's estate tax after the first $1 million of assets for Massachusetts. And for federal, it's more like 5.4 million. But if you do have a substantial amount of assets, it's a consideration to think about the estate tax. But I think more importantly, almost like the elder care theme, you just have to have an estate plan to decide what happens. Because like everything else, even if someone passes away, the last thing you want to be thinking about the moment someone passes away is, how are we paying for the funeral? How are you dealing with where do you want to do the funeral? Where am I going to be buried? Do we have a plot? Most people are dealing with that at the worst time, which is during the death, even if the person is older. And that is not only stressful, but can provide a lot of disharmony in the family. I've seen families fight over which cemetery we're going to bury someone at, and that's such an easy thing to solve.
But people don't want to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about that. Hi, come on over for dinner. We want to talk about when you die. It's hard.
It is hard, and that's why I think you have to probably involve some sort of professional who can help you through the topics and not make it seem as grim.
It's grim.
It is grim. It's not a happy. You can
grim.
Dress it a little bit. You can dress it a little bit and try to.
Empower people.
Yeah, because you can empower people to feel, hey, we're talking about this because you want to plan for the next generation or the next 2 generations, even down to I'd like to have someone have specific keepsakes or jewelry. It's not just about money. It's about things. Sometimes you want to see a legacy for the family go on, and how do you transmit all of the things, small or large, to the next generation can be empowering to talk about.
Yeah, and you want to make sure that what you have goes where you want it to go. So what I hear you saying is the first thing, again, like always, get a professional. Talk to somebody, talk early. And I know that it's sort of challenging, but you can change your mind. You can do a will, for example, today, and right, Gary?
I think if you think of this topic, as you said, nobody wants to really think about it or talk about it.
Yeah.
But if you think of it in the context of a complete financial plan,
mm-hmm.
And we talk about sort of life cycle planning, where we've got all the issues that we've talked about in some of our different shows, whether it has to do with education, whether it has to do with the divorce planning, whether it has to do with retirement and making your way through maybe a longer retirement, and estate issues. If you really think of those topics as, okay, I'm just not going to think about just this one, but it's part of an overall comprehensive financial plan, we can hit that topic there and help you work through it. And as you said, we can see you again in 6 months, or see you, in a year, or have some kind of a schedule, because things do change. And then if the unforeseen happens, okay, we need to obviously address it.
Right, if Aunt Frances decides that she's no longer talking, to Cousin Sadie, then she can get her in or out of the will as quickly as she wants to. I mean, that's all easily done, right?
And Mike deals with more of the estate planning issues, but I wonder if you want to maybe talk about the wills versus, other kinds of estate options that people have.
Right.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's a will, which generally covers all of your personal assets that aren't in trusts. And a will can be changed at any time, so long as you're capable mentally and able to. And then you have, a revocable trust that you can set up, which you can put your assets in during your lifetime, which will provide instructions to a trustee so that when you do pass, it's very simple to move those assets directly to whoever you intend to. The only more complicated piece are the irrevocable trusts. So you can gift some things away for estate planning purposes and to save tax into an irrevocable trust that also provides instructions and other things. But once you do it irrevocably, just like the word sounds,
Right,
you
that's
can't
done.
change that piece. That does require more of a professional, and not that they all don't, but that piece is a little bit more complex.
Right.
But definitely considering all the pieces, and even with that, basic things. My mother recently had hip replacement, and I feel embarrassed to even say this. I showed up at the hospital with the healthcare proxy and durable powers of attorney and all the documents you need when a person goes into the hospital if something should happen. And one of them was an actual copy, just a copy. It wasn't the actual original. And they sent me packing. I had to go back to my office and had me get an original. Now that was,
I don't think of that.
right. It was luckily we had all the documents, and I was close. And luckily that was elective surgery. But these small things you have to really think about from an estate planning perspective too. That it's not just wills and trusts. It could be healthcare proxies, durable powers of attorney to help someone with their finances. All the pieces in every hospital that you may go to may have a different take of what you need. So you really
Really?
need, sure.
There's no state or federal law that says what
There
you
are
need?
state and federal laws, but sometimes they don't like the language or the format that the attorney put it in. There's no necessarily, standard form. They have their own form sometimes, so you have to sort of pre-plan that if a loved one may be going in for a medical procedure, that you have all the documents that particular organization will accept.
Well, that's
Because the
a
last
question I
time-
want to ask early.
You do. So it goes much deeper into not even super long-term planning, but how do you deal with issues relating to health as you get older and whatnot, and to make sure you have not even just the right people designated, but just to make sure you have the current documents. And hopefully over time it'll get more digital and more standardized, and this won't be as much of an issue, but
And I'll
it is.
become even more alienated. More of us won't even get
It'll
it.
be an iPhone app. You'll go to the hospital, they'll scan it and say, okay, your healthcare
you're good.
proxy, all your instructions are good, and your medical history is on your chip or something, so your iWatch.
Well, the definition of family has changed so much too, that more and more I've read the grandparents are raising, the kids, their grandchildren, and those are all things that I don't think a lot of people think about.
No, you're right, and we've seen, grandparents obviously raising grandchildren. You've seen same-sex couples raising children or grandchildren at this point. We also see grandchildren taking care of grandparents. I've seen some of that at this point because
Yes.
grandparents are so much older. If grandparents are in the 90s, 100, the grandchildren could be 30s, 40s,
Older
50s.
too.
They're so much. The grandchildren are hauling
Yeah.
the, great-grandchild to take care of the grandparent. Sometimes it's an amazing evolution of multiple generations and whatnot. But most importantly, Gary's point. I think one of the biggest points, even in an estate plan, is to consider that it's probably going to cost $200,000 to $300,000 in out-of-pocket medical expenses to deal with all of these issues. And that is one of the most daunting issues for people who are in later stages of life.
I think it is the most daunting issue. I think people are generally concerned about how am I going to live? How's it going to work?
Yeah, and people make decisions about which medications they will take based on the co-pays, the out-of-pockets. Sometimes, the coverages just aren't there.
And their health, deteriorates because they make bad decisions based, unfortunately, on finances when it comes to their medication.
Yeah, and this is part of, as Gary mentioned on life cycle, it's part of the end of life. Because when you look at elder care, estate planning, it's sort of the end of life planning, that final cycle. You have obviously the birth cycle and retirement cycle, but the end of life cycle has become so much more complex.
And nobody really, as I always say, prepared us for it. For our parents, or for us dealing with our parents, or for us dealing, with our futures. And it's all, like you said, it's based on, there's a couple of factors. People are living longer, and they have more money. A lot of people have more money.
Yeah, and I think, it has become more difficult as people have had less children, too. There's fewer children to take care of.
They don't live near where their children
Yeah.
are, or the parents, people are scattered about the country. They may not live in the same area that they used to.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that, it used to be nursing homes. Everybody used to say, I want to go to a nursing home. Nursing homes, there are no nursing homes anymore. There are communities. There's assisted living. There are wonderful options.
Well, even as you know best, I'm amazed by all the communities that are turning up to be retirement communities,
Yes.
the over 55s.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
And they're great.
They're amazing. I mean,
Especially one at the Cape.
Yeah.
Southport.
Yeah.
No.
It is amazing that the world is changing a bit to realize once you leave the suburbs, let's say, and you've raised your children, you might go to first a retirement community from, say, 55 to 75. Then it may be to
Right.
assisted living
Right.
from 75 till 85. And then,
My goal, by the way, is to get those people all talking to each other, truly.
yeah,
Because that's what needs to happen,
yeah.
so that it is a normal transition from one to the other.
And people are starting to consider their end-of-life cycle in that way, that it used to be an over 55 community, kind of had maybe a negative connotation 20 years ago. Now they're sort of like Disney World. People can't wait to go into these beautiful places. And even assisted living didn't have a good connotation a few years ago, and now they're amazing. And you sort of people plan for that cycle now, the assisted living cycle, as opposed to, okay, you're retired, we don't know what happens in between, and then you're in a nursing home. And now a nursing home, not only are they more sophisticated for rehabilitation, but they are truly meant for just that final
Stage. of
stage.
life, yeah.
And who knows what smart people will figure out more pieces, in between that. But financially, all that's very expensive.
It's all very expensive.
Yeah,
and if
it's
you want to
all-
stay home, it's even more expensive.
Absolutely.
So you really need to plan for these things. And we need to go back, because I really want the message that if people don't remember one other thing that we said today, I think the most important thing is you got to be talking about it in the family, to each other, and to the experts. Nobody wants to talk about it.
No, and those who want to talk about it, many other family members simply don't want to listen because they just don't want to participate, and that's usually the hardest problem, of getting people engaged in the conversation.
Well, I don't remember which one of you, Gary, I think you said it. Old people don't want to go live where they see other old people. I mean, they don't want to be living in a situation where they're reminded constantly that they have disabilities. And so the key, as far as I'm concerned, is to get talking about it early enough so that that whole stigma is completely erased. You don't have to deal with it.
Absolutely. I
I
mean,
feel like I'm in therapy.
Well,
It's a-
communication and
Yeah,
sharing
talking.
information, is very
Yeah.
important.
no, it is a big issue as to selecting where you go next and who you want to be around, and is that enticing, and how you best do it.
And I don't think people have a clue. All of a sudden they're not dealing with it, and then all of a sudden they have to deal with it, and they don't know who to call, they don't know where to go.
The good news is that there are a lot more options,
Yeah.
right? So if you do share that information, people might be pleasantly surprised at the options that are out there now, and our entrepreneurs are coming up with more all the time, which is great.
But again, comes back to talking to your family and to experts.
And with trying to create a plan. And the plan never completely works. You know, it's not something that will work in all circumstances, but at least having something, knowing what might happen, what the plan is somewhat consoling to some degree.
I mean, it gives you some security. I mean, and that's what people are looking for. People just want to be comfortable in their later years, knowing it's all going to be fine. Nobody's going to make them live someplace they don't want to live. They're not going to be in the street, you know. I mean, it's a time when you just want to have the comfort of peace of mind, and that's a huge comfort. In our last minute or so, anything you guys want to? We're going to, of course, live forever. And we know that. We're good on that. But anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
Any thoughts?
Well, I think, you know, wrapping all of this is that when you do the plan, you've got to look at your investment and financial plan to take all of this, as Gary mentioned earlier and we've discussed, into consideration. How are you going to plan? How are you going to fund things? You know, what your portfolio may look like in your 20s as it grows versus, you know, at this point of time. Start young and think about the different phases and work your investments and plan, you know, with it, and it'll help.
Gary?
And have a vision for what you want to do. Like we talked about earlier, that you have those goals, your vision of your retirement and your life and the different stages. Share that. When we're putting together plans, it's good to know what that is, not just tomorrow, but plan it out. And then on the flip side of that, there's always the unforeseen. So planning for those possibilities of the unforeseen, as I mentioned, where you have maybe a family member that needs something that you didn't expect, et cetera. So that's helpful too in a plan.
You guys are great. Got to start talking about it like you just did. Gary Kuhn, Mike Feiner from Feiner Wealth Management. Thanks so much to all of you. We hope we've enlightened you a little bit. We appreciate you joining us. See you next time.